This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
On this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness, we finish some conversations that got started at Commodity Classic 2023. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson in the studio this week, but we will be hearing from Max Armstrong in just a moment. This past week, while we were at Commodity Classic in Orlando, Florida, we had the chance to talk to growers from across this great country, and several themes continued to come up: regulation, inflation, and supply chains. Max talked supply chains with Mike Steenhoek of the Soy Transportation Coalition.
Yeah, Mike, there's a story almost every day about rail transportation in the wake of that pileup along the Norfolk Southern line in Northeast Ohio just a few weeks ago. I talked about this with our friend Mike Steenhoek of the Soy Transportation Coalition. As we visited at the Commodity Classic of the Case IH stage, I asked him if there's the possibility in the rush to take some action in Washington if other problems could be created.
There was a safety mishap that we really need to continue to get our arms wrapped around, and we need to be able to do a real sober assessment of that. And if there's corrective action that needs to be taken, we need to do that because safety is most important. My worry does go, though, to the fact that the federal government has a pretty distinguished track record of trying, in the effort of trying to ameliorate or address a problem, to create an additional problem in response to that. And that's what we really want to avoid at all costs. So obviously we need to assess it, we need to make rational conclusions from it, we need to take corrective action, but we don't need the federal government to create a new problem in the effort to address an existing problem.
Obviously, the movement of hazardous materials will be in focus more and more, and the railroads, I think, are being asked to account for those and to report those, are they not?
They are, and there is going to be increasingly they're going to fall increasingly under the microscope on that. Now, you know, the fact is that the freight railroads have done a pretty exceptional job for years of transporting some of these hazardous materials without any kind of consequence whatsoever. So that needs to be celebrated, but it only takes one, and that's what we're learning. And obviously, if there was some over gaps in information or assessment or some kind of maintenance was not adequately done, we need to be on top of that, because if we don't have the safe transportation of those kind of materials, the U.S. economy and agriculture specifically will certainly fall victim to that.
For the rail shippers who need the covered hopper cars to move grain, are the rail lines delivering what is needed? I know that's been a bit of a challenge at times.
Yeah, the good news is that there's made some significant steps of improvement. The railroads are replenishing their workforce. That's been a real big problem for them. Fortunately, we were able to avert a railroad strike last year. The railroads have, subsequent to that agreement, actually come to separate agreements with their unions on things like paid time off. That was a real big sticking point. So we're in a much better place now than we were a number of months ago, but there's still a lot of improvement to be made.
Transportation along our highways, across our bridges, it's absolutely crucial. Farm-to-market roads need to be maintained, and those bridges. Plenty of money coming out of Washington to do that. Give us a status report on how that's going.
So the good news is that we do have some additional resources being provided, and that was mostly from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was signed into law in November of 2021. We're increasingly seeing that money get deployed. But when you talk to a State Department of Transportation official or a county engineer, one of the messages that they transmit is so much of the additional revenue that they're receiving is being totally overcome by the cost of building and maintaining some of these assets. Infrastructure inflation is a real big issue. So the cost of asphalt, concrete, labor, equipment, all of these things are much more costly, and that's making that purchasing power of those additional dollars really get eroded.
Mike Steenhoek of the Soy Transportation Coalition pointed out that the same thing is happening when you take a look at the upgrades of the river locks, that the projects there are getting more expensive because of inflation. Mike?
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Mike, for that update. But folks, it wasn't just uncertainty on farmer minds at Commodity Classic 2023. There were also several things to celebrate. Big yields in this last year prompted some groups to get together, and Max had a chance to learn more.
Oh, I'm sure you noticed it too, Mike. There was a little bit of partying going on at Commodity Classic as the seed companies and their growers were recognizing some tremendous yields in the 2022 growing season. They know you can't live on your laurels, but they felt it was time indeed to celebrate. I talked about it with Jamie Horton, DeKalb brand manager.
We're celebrating last year's NCGA National Corn Yield Contest win. So celebrating those 2022 wins and prepping for 2023.
There were some great numbers in parts of the country in 2022.
Yeah, so we're highlighting, last year at the contest there were 27 national winners and DeKalb was lucky enough to have 17 national wins. So great performance last year and we hope to see that again in 2023.
Are the new products coming along for growers too?
Yes, so as we gear up for 2023, we're launching that 2024 launch class, and so we've got 29 brand new 2024 products that we'll be testing in our local plots this year.
What are some of the things growers want to zero in on as they're making those seed choices?
I think the biggest thing is, selecting the right genetics for your farm and your different fields across your operation, and then certainly thinking through some of the traits and pests that you have. So how do we control those pests and selecting the right trait that matches that acre?
Jamie Horton, who has her roots in agriculture in the southwest part of Illinois, is the DeKalb brand manager there, Mike.
Well, thanks, Max, for that update. And farmers, congratulations on those successful yields in 2022. There were some big numbers up on the board for this past year. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. Now it's time to talk markets. Joining us this week is Ted Seifert of Zaner Financial Services. And Ted, this past week we saw commodity market news kind of fall to the wayside as the outside market took precedence. How much do we as commodity producers and traders need to be concerned with these bank failures outside our industry?
Yeah, that's a potential big deal from both sides of the equation, right? If we're going to be bailing out these big banks to the tune of trillions of dollars, that's more money that's being pumped into the economy. That's more inflationary pressures that could be positive for commodities. However, at the same breath, you say, well, if I'm the Fed, you would think that you have to put more or be more aggressive on interest rates in order to try to offset that. And that could be actually really negative, on top of the idea that if some of these banks start to collapse and we're not able to bail all of them out, that could have a very profound effect on the economy as a whole. If the economy as a whole is sharply lower, then that starts to become deflationary. So you've got a Fed and it's an overall government policy right now that's walking a very fine tightrope of trying to fight inflation, yet having to do things that would be really rather inflationary at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out. I know there's two more regional banks that are sort of on the chopping block at the moment. No need to name names, but if those two go down, this becomes a much bigger and bigger problem to the point where it starts to become a crisis. And crises aren't good for stock markets. They're not good for people's spending habits and consumer demand. And that could become a bigger problem further onto the pipeline, further down the chain for commodities. In the meantime, the U.S. dollar has gone sharply higher in the last couple of weeks. That's going to make things a little bit more interesting for our exports. And even though corn in particular, wheat continues to come down, prices are lower, but with that higher dollar, that starts to offset some of these lower prices and makes us a little bit less competitive on the global market once again.
But you did mention some buyers have stepped in to buy some U.S. corn, some big sales this past week. Ted, where'd they go?
Yeah, China. So here's the thing about that. It's interesting to see how long it takes for these to get reported on daily wires, because these are things that we were talking about back really in early March, even 10 days ago. They were rumored in the market. We had talked about China buying 50 million bushel. And then, 9, 10 days, 11 days later, you see these sales come through on the daily wire. So, that's added support to the market from the sense that, hey, we're optimistic that our exports are going to get rolling again. But it also doesn't mean that China's in there buying right now. This was something that was a little bit earlier in the month. And whether China needs to continue to buy or not remains to be seen. I will say, though, we are really the cheapest corn in the world right now. So if the export demand is there, that should mean good things for our exports, and maybe we can catch up to the USDA's number. But again, the next few weeks are really going to tell a lot of that story.
Ted, new crop corn pricing, March 31st, big report day from USDA. Should growers be doing any new crop pricing ahead of that time?
You know, new crop's really been the heaviest here in the last couple of days. And that really goes a long way to show that the tightness is up front, right? If we end up with a good growing season this year if we get planted first all, and then we end up with good weather, we can fix this problem of tight supplies, tight stocks. And the market's starting to realize that. And we're starting to realize that that longer term forecast of going from La Nina to El Nino, drought monitor looks good. All the signs are there for what could be a really good crop. So yeah, I think looking at pricing new crop is a good idea. That being said, a lot of times we get a little bit of a bounce in front of planting, so you might be a little bit patient, but you got about a 40-day window to try to get a little bit more done.
All right, we'll be back for more with Ted Seifert of Zaner Financial Services. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. We're back talking markets with Ted Seifert of Zaner Financial Services. And Ted, let's talk about old crop corn. We've got some corn in the bin out there across the countryside. Prices are moving. Do we need to be pulling the trigger on getting some sold?
We've had a really nice bounce the last few days in old crop corn. And you wonder if that is going to be the extent of it. Now, as we talked about, there is this sort of 45-day window where we try to kind of rally into spring planting. Seasonality is positive for corn right now. However, seasonality usually is coming from much lower prices, right? And there's this need to try to buy more corn acres or jockey against soybean acres. With the prices that we're at, I don't know if we need to see that. There is a tight old crop corn situation perceivably, but the balance sheet is getting bigger, meaning the ending stocks are getting bigger. If we start to see the exports in a fairly decent way, maybe that helps corn. But I'm a little bit nervous about that. I'm a little worried about that. I think you use this recent bounce that we have in corn to get a little bit more price on old crop if you're not fairly far along already.
Let's turn our focus over to the soybean market. Ted, the fundamentals don't look nearly as bright in the new crop soybean market. How should growers be approaching that as they prepare for this planting season?
Yeah, I mean, you still have really good prices on the board for both old crop and new crop beans. I think you really need to be fairly aggressive on pricing new crop beans on any sustainable ounce that we have. I think we're going to plant a lot of beans this year. I think the South American bean crop is massive. The global ending stocks number isn't all that tight. So yeah, we might get another push from old crop beans. It might help to pull new crop, but those spreads are widening. They have been. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of upside potential in new crop beans unless we have a major weather issue, which at the moment, it's hard to say that's going to happen.
And Ted, thinking ahead to those planting intentions report, your number right now, are you 90 and 90 corn and soybeans?
I'm 91 beans, 91 corn, 89 beans at that 180, overall. I don't know. We've struggled to get to 180 acres in row crops the last few years. So I'm hoping that's there. The prices are right for that to be there. But do we need them? I mean, yeah. I mean, if we have a good growing season and we do trendline yields, that's going to really make the new crop balance sheets rather large. Our carryover is going to be rather large because we've seen a lot of demand destruction occur from this two-year plus period of high prices.
That's so true. Could bring corn prices down. Could be some relief for those feeder cattle producers who are watching these high values. How do you manage that risk, Ted?
Yeah, feeder cattle guys. I mean, you got to be happy that corn is well off the highs now at this point and hoping that they don't jump right back up there. There's a lot of risk in the feeder cattle market, right? I mean, high price inputs, relatively high price animals, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of things that you can do. One, I do think there's more upside in the feeder cattle market because I'm just told there's just really not the animals out there. That being said, I think you really do need to look at put options to protect that downside because you're paying so much going into it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us this week, Ted.
Pleasure's mine, Mike. Thanks.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by Copperhead Ag Products. Visit copperheadag.com for more information. Last week, Chad Colby gave us a preview of what was to come at the Con Expo event in Las Vegas. This week, he's got the real deal.
You're right, Mike. We warned you last week that this tech segment was coming. I attended the 2023 Con Expo show out in Las Vegas this week. And like I told Max when we talked, there's truly nothing like the amount of content in a show like this in North America. It only happens every 3 years. And one of the things you're going to see in this segment is there's so much new technology in agriculture now that I want to tell you is more mainstream. Like you look at these autonomous machines right here and think about the application in agriculture. putting equipment in places that we really never could before because of the technology. Now, all the major manufacturers had huge announcements. Case unveiled like 35 new machines, but there was one really consistent theme that is completely different than I've ever seen at a show like this, agriculture or construction, and that is the vast amount of equipment that is either fully electric powered or has an electric drivetrain. And I think that should be a little, I don't want to say alarming, but it ought to get everyone's attention in agriculture, because for the first time it's coming, and it's coming in every flavor. Whether that's a backhoe, a wheel loader, you're seeing all kinds of drivetrains that are completely different. Or maybe just 2 or 3 years ago, those were in a few machines. Well, now they're in the entire lineup. And some of these displays were incredible, like Caterpillars. You can see the equipment there operating in the background. And they showcased, again, so much machinery that I want to tell you is electrified in some way, shape, or fashion. And it allows the industry to be a lot more mobile than ever. And I think when you start talking about that and thinking about that on your farm or ranch, you need to understand the costs are going to come down. They already have, because everyone's doing it. Now look, you see some of the stuff, and yes, that's very futuristic. Don't get me wrong, but the applications are there, especially in terms of keeping that operator safe. And I think that's the thing when you walk around these shows. There's so much technology about the operator. How do we train that operator? How do we educate him to be better? And of course, in a show like this, you're going to see things that you don't get a chance to see very often. And maybe that's the crushing of aggregate, like you see this new impact crusher right here, and certainly all the components and machinery around it to size those aggregates. There's a whole building showing the latest and greatest in that technology as well. And Mike, I know you're like me, pretty excited to see it. The new Big Bud was on display for the very first time in a pre-production model. It had a lot of people looking at that as well. I'll tell you what, this show only happens every 3 years. It's something you might want to put on your calendar in the future.
Thank you, Chad, for that update. This push into electronic drives is going to be interesting to watch, and frankly, I'm glad some other folks are going to be trying it first. Appreciate that update, Chad Colby. Folks, we're not done talking technology in this episode. Later on in the program, we'll do a Tech at Work segment with our friend Willie Vogt. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness, where each weekend at this time we share with you knowledge about our agriculture industry across America. In Ag States of America, brought to you by Pivot Bio. Charlie Behrens this weekend takes us to where you find West Point, North Platte, and Ogallala, and a lot of great agriculture, Nebraska.
The United States of America can be very different from one state to another, but one thing every state has in common is agriculture.
Hey there, I'm Charlie Behrens, and welcome to the Agricultural States of America. We're going to test your knowledge about the agriculture of different states and hopefully give you a bit of appreciation for all the great things that farmers are producing across America. Now today we're talking about Nebraska, also known as the Cornhusker State. Now aside from being the mascot for the University of Nebraska, the term Cornhusker comes from, as you might be able to guess, husking corn. And from there, it's safe to assume that Nebraska grows a lot of corn. Now, if you're thinking corn, boring, let me remind you that aside from your cornflakes and your corn on the cob, corn is responsible for oil, syrup, starch, fuel, and most importantly, whiskey. Nebraska is third in the nation for corn production, turning out 1.6 billion bushels of corn each year. But I bet you didn't know that a good majority of that corn actually stays in state to help feed the cattle. That's right, Nebraska's cattle get to have their corn and eat it too. Now, agriculture is Nebraska's largest industry, with the cattle business powering the economy. And that's what we call a cash cow. In fact, the state supports 19,000 cattle ranches where the cows start off on a grass-fed diet before heading to the feedlots to put on a corn-based diet. Then all you have to do is subtract the fed, add some bread, and you got a corned beef sandwich. Don't forget the pickle. Beyond cattle, farmers also raise hogs, turkeys, and chickens. They produce eggs, dairy products, and about 460,000 pounds of wool. And thank you for that, Nebraska, because what would a Midwest winter be like without wool? Not warm. So 92% of Nebraska's total land is used for agriculture. However, the most valuable resource for the state's farmers is not what's on the land, but what lies beneath it. Aquifers. And that is exactly why you don't judge a state by its corn. And for those of you still saying aqua what? Aquifers are large, permeable bodies of rock under the Earth's surface that hold groundwater. These aquifers then allow pivot irrigation systems to deliver water to crops in an otherwise challenging climate. Having a ready source of water helps farmers avoid crop loss due to drought. Now you might be thinking, okay, sounds cool, but how much water is that anyway? Well, there's so much water under Nebraska that if it was above ground, it would have a depth of almost 38 feet. So in scientific terms, that's a lot of water. The water from the Ogallala Aquifer and the Platte River are an amazing resource, and farming in Nebraska would not be the same without them. Beyond corn, soybeans, and sorghum, Nebraska also grows hay in every single county. And in the western part of the state, you can find millet, sunflowers, wheat, and dry edible beans. Nebraska is actually the nation's leader in growing the Great Northern Bean. The Great Northern beans are very popular throughout North America. But despite their popularity, I guess a bunch of you would never realize you've even eaten them. But they are added to soups and stews and casseroles or hot dish if you're in Minnesota. Now beyond this tough Cornhusker persona, Nebraska actually has a sweet side. Take sugar beets for example. Farmers have been successfully producing sugar beets in western Nebraska for well over 100 years, thanks to the arid climate, altitude, and the ability to irrigate. Sugar beets thrive on long days with sunshine, and cool nights in the western part of Nebraska. They also like long walks on the beach and curling up with a good book. What's even sweeter is that Nebraska has enough honeybee colonies to produce more than 2.7 million gallons of honey every single year. And if that doesn't satisfy your sweet tooth, they also produce around 100,000 gallons of wine each year, which reminds me it is 5 o'clock somewhere and I better get going. Anyway, that's all the time we have for now. But you can always go to pivotbio.com/agstates and click on the show icon to explore more about the agriculture of your favorite states and test your knowledge to win great prizes and more. All right, I'm Charlie Behrens, and we'll see you next time on the Agricultural States of America.
Well, Charlie didn't leave much out, to be sure. Now, he didn't mention the fact that one of the biggest railroads important to agriculture is headquartered in Nebraska. The Union Pacific calls Omaha its home. Nor did he mention the fact that there's a huge farm combine plant in Nebraska. At Grand Island in the central part of the state is where they make the Case IH and New Holland combines. We had the privilege of visiting there just a couple of years ago. Speaking of Grand Island, that's where you find the Nebraska State Fair every summer. A few years ago, they moved that fair from Lincoln to Grand Island. It proved to be a very successful move. That fair coming up this summer will be August 25th through September 4th. Just a few days after that will be Husker Harvest Days. The largest totally irrigated outdoor farm show in the country is at Grand Island. That'll be September 12th through the 14th at the showgrounds not too far west of town. And there's one more event taking place before all of that. Coming up in June at Grand Island at Fauner Park will be the Red Power Roundup. The collectors of the International Harvester Farm Equipment, trucks and tractors will be there. We look forward to being there. I'll be appearing at the Red Power Roundup at Grand Island. The dates are June 15th through the 17th. There's more coming up on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. Stay with us here. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. We're not done talking technology on this week's episode. In fact, we're going to be talking technology for the next several months with our friend Willie Vogt. He serves as the technology editor over at Farm Progress, and he's diving deep into some new tools that are out there for farmers. Specifically, it's the John Deere Operations Center.
For this installment of Tech at Work, we traveled to LaFont Farms in southern Illinois, where we're looking at how they're using Operations Center. Matt LaFont talked about one area of Operations Center that many may not think of, the use of the tool for managing the agronomy side of the operation.
We're using Op Center as an agronomy tool here at LaFont Farms to take a little closer look at the seeds we're planting, the chemicals we're using, some of the different stuff we're doing with soils. It helps us when we used to go out there and plant. We know what seeds we put where, and we could glean from that a little bit of information as far as on the yield monitors. But now with the Op Center, we can pinpoint at the end of the day when we go from planting to harvest, what seed does what on what soil type, what chemical does what on what seed, be it fungicide, where some seeds it helps, some seeds it doesn't. And you can go right in there to every field and see what's working.
Supporting John Deere Operations Center is an important business. Isaac Hickerson, who's a data manager with Hudson's, works with several of the dealership's customers to keep them going in the field. He shared with us a new feature that's been added to the system that allows farmers to do a better job of managing the workload across the entire farm.
Things like Work Planner, being able to set up things before we get in the field this season, what rates they might want to plant, what farms and fields are going to go in corns and beans, what guidance lines they want to use. Gives them the ability to set all that up pre-season. Then once the operator pulls into the field, into the boundary, all that information automatically populates. There's no pushing buttons, clicking this, clicking that anymore, especially if an operator is not real distinguished in running a display. It take care of that all from the shop, send that to them. If they want to make an edit on the fly, they just get out their phone, change that work planner, send it straight back to the display. And so it really helps cut down on problems with documentation or issues inside the displays for customers. And then being able to analyze things as they're going on in the field. Watch a tractor or combine run through the field, watch the display, making sure they're running at the correct speed and making sure everything's going as planned like they want it to. And then at the end of the year, being able to analyze all those maps and run reports and see, okay, did this side-by-side work for me? Did this product work for me? And then that allows them to make decisions going into 2024, 2025, things like that.
From enhancing the way farmers use agronomic tools in the business to doing a better job of managing workflow, John Deere Operations Center is making a difference here at LaFont Farms. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Willie Vogt.
Thanks, Willie. And a reminder, folks, we'll have another update on that Tech at Work segment next month when Willie goes to explore a farm in Arizona.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Well, Greg Solier joins us in the studio here, which means it's time to talk weather. Greg, it has been active on the West Coast, and this week ahead, is that parade of moisture going to continue?
It does, maybe not quite the severity that we've seen, particularly through California. Nonetheless, any significant system relative to this point in early springtime can be a problem. But again, on the flip side, positive side, significant drought improvement while the runoff and storm damage issues continue into California. And we've had a pretty good swath of moisture of late into the Pacific Northwest. They have been on the shorter side of the gauge, but here's one weather system. Lingering cold, almost midwinter-like air still through the southern Canadian prairie, so you get these disturbances on a strong jet stream to ride the periphery of it, and we get another round of moisture into the northern plains, the Dakotas, coming off last week's winter storm, and another winter storm winds up here. Livestock managers heads up accordingly across the Dakotas, the Black Hills northward, probably some sub-zero cold as we saw last week near the Canadian border, and a pretty sizable dip in the jet stream, so the pattern indicative of more moisture for the Pacific Northwest as well into the middle and late portions of the week. Plenty of stream and river rises and flooding and debris flooding and rising and running off, and it has just been a tough go of it, particularly into the central valleys, even down into the San Joaquin Valley, some river issues as well. But again, drought improvement. Here's the latest southwestern system moving into the plains with a wide range of moisture. Haven't had a lot of moisture. The drought continues on. It's worst of it through Kansas and Oklahoma into Texas, but opportunities to pick up not only showers and thunderstorms here, but unfortunately another winter storm for Nebraska points on northward. Some dry time and cool weather through Arizona, and dry weather as well for a change into the valleys of California. Much needed here for the end part of the week.
Well, Greg, that is active. Does that activity move into the central part of the U.S.?
Yeah, no shortage of weather systems. We're in this weakening phase of La Nina here in the next probably 4 to 8 weeks to come. Wrong time of the year to get that to come to a completion here because it will be a busy and active one. So we get some separation here. Weak high pressure across the western Corn Belt. One weather system has made its way into the northeast of New England. Watch this feature and one coming out of the southwestern states. And here we go. Showers and thunderstorms and some pretty good rainfall again. Stream and river rises. There's been plenty of standing water and a lot of mud in those central and southern Corn Belt locales. Upper Midwest, rain and snow back across the Dakotas and into Montana, another winter storm for livestock managers. So you get at least moisture, but in some areas for the wrong reason and the wrong case. Dry time over the southern plains. The worst of it here through Kansas, Oklahoma, with drought in mind into the southeastern states. And we're out there, of course, assessing the back 40 coming off last week's cold, the lingering effects of that into the southeastern states. But here we go. We ramp it up with severe weather, showers and thunderstorms, Red River Valley of the south on eastward into the flip side, backside Oklahoma Panhandle, rain and snow and a shot of some colder air as well in the desert southwest of New Mexico late in the week.
What do you see for the eastern third of the country over this week, Greg?
Busy weather pattern continues on. The latest winter storm making its way, a fast moving clipper into the northeast of New England. Wind and cold and snow there. Quiet high pressure across the Corn Belt locales. We get into the backside of it and a trend upwards on temperatures, but at the same time, while we get a little system across the Atlantic, a warm front on the move, another low across the plains, showers and thunderstorms, snow melt for the upper Midwest, some pretty good downpours across the central and southern Corn Belt locales. Chill in the air, frost in the ground, and certainly it's been a cold scenario. Get out there and assess things coming off the recent spat of readings into the mid-20s and low 30s. Warmer weather back west of the Mississippi, and with it, showers and thunderstorms with a warm frontal push. Some of those will tend heavy and severe from the Tennessee Valley southward to the Gulf Coast later in the week.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
And we're back talking weather with meteorologist Greg Solier. And Greg, you showed an active forecast for the week ahead. Yep. Who's going to get what when it comes to precipitation?
A little bit of everything for everyone. Actually, too much of a good thing for some folks. But again, if you want to look at it from a positive standpoint, drought relief. It's over with in many eastern Corn Belt locales up and down the eastern seaboard. Some modest improvement in the western Corn Belt. We still have issues from Nebraska on southward, and we'll get a fair amount of moisture in one form or another. Snow and ice from the I-80 corridor on northward, severe weather down south, and drenching rainfall where we really don't need any more of it across parts of the Delta, southeastern states, and southern Corn Belt locales. This weather system in the Pacific Northwest drops into the Four Corners and southwest and swings to the north and northeast. So with time, more moisture too into the Pacific Northwest. Hopefully storm pattern easing in California, and welcome to springtime, by the way, in the 20th, Mike, across the country.
Well, Greg, the week of March 27th, will it feel like spring?
It will in some areas for a change, and others where we had some balmy winter breezes. Finally, the feel of springtime all the way up towards the Sioux, the St. Lawrence River Valley, southeastern states. Note the push of some cooler to colder air, lingering almost midwinter air from Montana on northward in that buckled pattern across the heartland. So you get systems in still from the Pacific Northwest, added late season moisture for California, and a stormy pattern from snow for the upper Midwest, northern Corn Belt, to severe weather across parts of the central plains and southern Corn Belt, back to dry time over the deep southern and southeastern United States.
That first full week of April, Greg, the 3rd through the 9th, what are you expecting?
Well, folks, probably getting out there, trying to do some field work, some planting, and hopefully a little more warmth into the soils. Yeah, that warm ridge that has dominated the southern states until the frost and freeze of the past week to 10 days reestablishes itself in this part of the country. Cold air still holding on. Lots of snow cover and snowpack through the Canadian Prairie, upper Midwest, and it's a fast jet stream, and this compaction of temperatures. We'll see that much of the spring and early summer. So you get this scenario, stormy into the Pacific Northwest, much of the heartland. Probably pretty good severe weather outbreak, and across much of the Corn Belt, back to dry time over the southeastern states. Should be a busy and active severe weather season across the plains and Corn Belt too.
Does it start to settle down as we get into mid-April, Greg?
Well, from a temperature standpoint here, pretty good slug of cold air relative to mid to late April, still holding on across the Canadian prairie. A slingshot of weather systems in from the Pacific Northwest. They deepen and energize here, make their way into the northeast of New England. And here is some of this spring and summer warmth over the southern states. And so this complexity of temperatures and contrasted temperatures strengthens the winds up aloft. We still have this average trough position, La Nina working against us here, and you get this scenario with more snow across the mountains of the northern Rockies, the Cascades, late season snow for the Dakotas, the upper Midwest towards the Sioux. Not much opportunity for field work across the heartland. Dry time over the southern states, keeping an eye on the severe weather too.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
In Max's Tractor Shed this weekend, there's a before and after shot of the tractor that I'm going to feature here. It sure does look a lot better, a Farmall 400. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you each weekend on This Week in Agribusiness by Mystic Lubricants. Mystic Lubricants made to make it last. A Farmall 400 is a beautiful looking tractor when restored. All of that red paint. This restoration by George Crom there on his farm at Rochester, Indiana sure shows how wonderfully styled that tractor was. Made in 1955, this particular 400. And you can see how good the restoration was when you take a look at the tractor before it was restored. There's a dealer decal on there indicating it came from the Nix dealership at Olney, Illinois. But George told me he bought it from a neighbor there in northern Indiana. Now look back on the wall. This caught my attention. Way back there on the wall, there's a banner in that shed that proclaims that was the home farm, one of the farms of the Farm Progress Show. Yes, it was. I was there. 1989 was where that show was held on the Crom Farm and the nearby Weaver Farm. A show that's, by the way, celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. The show came along just 2 years before this tractor, a 1955 Farmall 400 owned by George Crom at Rochester, Indiana. Let's see what's selling in the week ahead at Big Iron Auctions. We bring in our friend Mark Stock to fill you in on that.
Well, Max, we got a big group of auctions next week. There's a huge 2-day online auction on SullivanAuctioneers.com. We'll sell with no reserve on Monday, March the 20th, and on Tuesday, March the 21st. If you need a combine, folks, AHW Equipment LLC, they've got really nice late model machines. Van Wall Equipment, folks, they've got combines as well. 2018, 2019, 2021 year model S780 combines. In addition, the Randy Clare Estate Auction, the John Dickerman Retirement Sale. Gary Settles will sell a 2018 John Deere 6155R with loader with only 256 hours. There's dozers, excavators, and skid steers. On Wednesday, March the 22nd, Rolling Meadow Ranch Retirement Sale featuring a 2014 John Deere 9510 RT track tractor and a very well cared for John Deere 455 3-section 35-foot drill, plus other items. Lewis and Scott Arndt are retiring, features a 2020 John Deere 8R 340 mechanical front tractor. They've got a 2013 John Deere 4730 sprayer. They have 78 items on their auction. Check it all out on SullivanAuctioneers.com and watch the BigIron.com auction on Wednesday with a lot of quality equipment.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Pioneer, developing new generations of seed innovations for new generations of farmers. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And now it's time to meet that next generation. Joining us this week is Izzy Fanning Wilson. Izzy serves as the North Carolina State Vice President for the FFA. And Izzy, what was it that prompted you to become a part of FFA in North Carolina?
Well, in 8th grade, I kind of got into my hard-headed era, and my grandfather was kind of tired of me always arguing with him, and he was an FFA when he was a kid as well. And so he told me about this leadership development event that the FFA has called Parliamentary Procedure, which is kind of running a business meeting, but also you get to debate a little bit. And so I went ahead and joined under his kind of persuasion. I don't think he was too happy at the end of that because it turned out I just learned how to argue my points a little better. But that's really what drew me into FFA to begin with.
That's fantastic, Izzy. And then in your 5 years, what are some of the highlights of your experience as an FFA'er?
Regional office was one of my biggest ones. It was a way for me to see that I loved to be in the leadership position, to lead students and to help them grow. National Convention was really another event that really just locked in my want and willingness to become a state officer as well, which is the position I'm in now. And then a CDE that really locked in what I want to do with my future was farm business management, which is a lot of math, but that's always been my strong suit, and I just really do love it. So
you mentioned you're serving as a state officer here in North Carolina, and what are some of your duties as a vice president?
Well, we all work together. So in North Carolina, we have 5 vice presidents and 1 president, so we all kind of have the same duties. But some of the things that we do together are like chartering ceremonies. North Carolina is the 4th biggest state organization for FFA, and we're continuing to try and grow and build up our membership. We do a lot of leadership development events. We do a lot of conferences. We have a mega conference coming up next weekend, so we'll have over 300 students come to learn more about themselves and how that they could be leaders in their community.
That is fantastic. And Izzy, do you hope to stay in agriculture?
I hope that I can definitely give back. My degree right now is not specifically in agriculture, but agriculture is the biggest commodity that goes out into international ways for our economy. And so I'm international business, and hopefully that'll be able to give right back into agriculture.
Ag is everywhere. That's Izzy Fanning Wilson, North Carolina State FFA Vice President. Well, I was at Commodity Classic last week. I noticed something interesting, folks. If you want to connect with everybody who's anybody at a farm show, the way to do it is to go with Max Armstrong. That guy bumps into the coolest people, and Commodity Classic was no exception.
Yeah, Mike, we get to visit with a lot of farmers and ranchers. They're just great people, genuinely nice people. And that's where we love to be, out with those folks. Every now and then, though, we get a surprise when we meet somebody from outside of the ag industry, someone from the entertainment world. And goodness gracious, they turn out to be genuinely warm and personable and friendly. That was my reaction when I met Ben Bailey, the cash cab guy. The comedian and actor who stars in that television show. He was at Commodity Classic. The folks at Pivot Bio had him riding around in a cash cab, a golf cart, as the lights were flashing and he was asking questions. I got to hop in for a ride with Ben and really thoroughly enjoyed the time spent with him. Just a warm, personable individual. Oh yeah, and I got a little cash too. I must have answered a couple of questions right. I had a similar reaction when I met the guy who runs BASF around the world, the crop protection company. You know, sometimes when you meet these corporate executives, they have such responsibilities, so many people reporting to them, so many plants they have to oversee, so many people trying to keep the media at bay, that there is not that warmth and personality that you would hope to find. That was not the case with Livio Tedeschi. He is the president globally of BASF Crop Solutions. And as I talked with Livio, I said, well, we've had the chance to meet a lot of your people. We've enjoyed being with them out in the field and certainly have an appreciation for the folks in the crop protection industry.
Thank you very much, Max, for that compliment. I think that's the nicest way you can see to somebody working in agriculture. So what we think is that agriculture is the biggest job on earth, and we don't want to do anything else than be together on the field with our growers, understand what they need, and deliver it to them in the best possible way.
The world around agriculture is so much in focus in many good ways. You have a great story to tell, and you're helping farmers do that, aren't you?
Yeah. Of course, and you say that the world is changing so much. The last 2 years we are going through a COVID pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine, and all that has revealed how fragile our food system can be and how much we should focus on food security. And now growers are doing that day by day, and they deserve all our respect. And I think they're doing this today in a world which is so different: weather issues, weather volatility, water scarcity, complying with new regulation, with demand around sustainability and carbon management. And what we do is to use all the breadth of our technologies, from seed and crop protection, digital farming, to help growers navigate a world which has been as complex as never before.
And yet, with these changes that take place, you have to have that long-term picture. You have to be looking over the horizon because of the time frame required to bring products to market. How do you do that?
So we were born as a company in agriculture 110 years ago, doing fertilizer. So we set up the process to create industrial fertilizers. Now, if you compare what we do today back to those days, it's a different world. So now what we do is trying to use the breadth of our technologies and see how can we combine them to produce the desired outcome. And what is that outcome? Is higher productivity leading to profit for growers, and then helping to reduce CO2 footprint and to comply with all the requirements for the crop insurance and for whatever high value they can achieve to place their commodities. And this is the way we want to transform agriculture for the future.
Livio, you're a great partner for our farmers. Thank you.
I hope we will continue to be farmers, and everything starts with them. They do the biggest job on earth, and it's only listening to farmers that we can learn how to drive our innovation machine and deliver solutions which will make an impact. And if in 10 years we can say, you know, we helped to shape the way agriculture looks like today, then I think we have done a good job.
He's the president of the BASF Crop Solutions Division globally, Livio Tedeschi, who is a native of Italy, but his office is in Germany, Mike.
Thank you, Max, for that conversation. And Livio's thoughts about agriculture being so globally vital is certainly something we always like to keep in mind. And in fact, next week, it will be top of mind. Next Tuesday is National Ag Day. That's March 21st. There will be events happening in Washington, D.C., and Max will be going out to cover them. So tune in next week. We'll have more right here on This Week in Agribusiness.
This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.